So, my dear friends, we have already discussed over the book of signs, and today we are entering into the book of glory. And the first part of the book of glory begins with the washing of the feet of the disciples. That is, we can say, according to the Gospel of John, it is the Last Supper of Jesus. The discourse section is difficult to outline because it is more concerned with developing repetitive themes than with following a precise arrangement. The discourse proper starts in 1312 or 1331. Some even started in 1413, but it is too late. Questions intervene only in 1336. But while the discourse starts well after 13:1, so to say, the book of glory you can say, book of glory, the first part is the discourse, farewell discourse, and second part we can see the passion and the resurrection of Jesus, the passion narrative and the resurrection of Jesus. And 13:1 to 17:26 is the farewell discourse. The discourse starts well after 13:1, but the first part of the discourse interprets Jesus' act of foot washing, and so cannot be separated from that act in our outline. We regard the foot washing as the narrative introduction to the farewell discourse that prefigures the passion. So to say, the foot washing is a kind of prefiguration for the passion narrative. That is most important aspect of this foot washing. The foot washing, Jesus presents what is going to happen in the passion narrative, or he is in a way preparing himself to offer himself to the world. That is a foot washing. So we come to the first part, that is a foot washing. 13:1, 17:26, some introductory issues of 13:1, 17:26. Just as Mark 13 interprets the imminent passion of Mark 14:15 for the disciples in terms of their future tribulation, so Jesus' final discourse in John's Gospel interprets the meaning of Jesus' passion for his disciples. They will share both his sufferings and his resurrection life. So why I present with Mark. Mark 13 also we can see, 14:15 we can see Mark presents the tribulation of Jesus, and Gospel of John also presents, we can see 13 he presents the foot washing and he is speaking about his passion. He is in a way presenting before the disciples that he is going to die. And same way we can see in the Gospel of Mark also the same chapter 14 and 15. And most commonly, scholars divide chapter 14 from chapter 15 and 16, suggesting that they are either alternative versions or a reworked version in addition to an original version. So to say, most of scholars agree that the 15 and 16 chapters are the interpretation of the chapter 14. Chapter 14 he presents the farewell discourse, and he explains that 14 chapter again in the 15 and 16. So to say, the themes that is recurring in 14 is repeated or explained in 15, 16, even we can say 17. Then we come to some scholars present the discourse as testament of Jesus. Why we say testament of Jesus? So to say, scholars say that Jesus in a way presenting that he is making a kind of testament before the people, that he is going to die for the salvation of the people. And scholars have offered various proposals concerning the specific genre or generic associations of his discourse. So to say, first and foremost, some of the scholars say that before the battle, the people make a kind of discourse. If you look at any of the war, before war, maybe the prime ministers or the kings make a kind of discourse, a kind of, we can say, reforming or renewing the people's faith, or giving extra energy to the people to fight, or the aim of this war. So some scholars say that this discourse also is presented such a way that it is kind of speeches before battle, also included exhortations to endure hardship, and a standard in ancient literature. And as we know, the ancient literature, the people used to, the kings used to make a kind of speech before the war in order to encourage the people that we are undergoing a kind of hardships, hurdles, but we will have, ultimately we will have success. Same way, Jesus also is presenting a kind of farewell discourse before he enters his battle of passion. So second thing, with or without an allusion to the Last Supper, the background of the discourse includes traditional elements of covenant form, probably reminiscent of Deuteronomy, where Moses also gives his final discourses in the context of the all fourth gospel. The one greater than Moses is providing his testament for the future. So some scholars say that Jesus is making kind of testament like Moses. You know, if you look at the synoptic gospel, Jesus comes as a second Moses, and John also is one way presenting that Jesus is a second Moses. And Moses, he made a kind of testament before the people, before he died. Same way, Jesus also is making a kind of covenant testament before the people of Israel, or the people of New Israel. Then many people thought that shortly before death, some people exercised the keen prophetic insight, an idea possibly related to those testaments which offer predictions for the future. As in many cultures, a person might leave special instructions before dying. Sometimes the same format could be employed for a departure speech, not necessarily indicating imminent death. Farewell or departure speeches were a standard biblical and early Jewish literary form. They also appear elsewhere in the Greco-Roman works and the New Testament. So some scholars say that before some great people, before they die, they make a kind of prophesy, a kind of prophetic versions that is going to happen, or they make some testament that even Buddha made a testament. So same way, Jesus also is making kind of testament before his death. Jesus' testament. So we make a kind of final comments that Jesus' testament differs from typical testaments in some regards. Often those who delivered such testaments were aged, summoned listeners to hear, recounted much of the future, etc. But mainly leave such information to the paraclete. So such statements also often included a blessing, a burial instructions, an oath, descriptions of sad parting, and the person's death. But a testament need not include all these characteristics to fit the general context of the genre. Thus, many New Testament scholars place Mark 13 and 12 and 13 and Peter's in this category. Second Peter's in this category, despite their having only some of these characteristics. So theologically, we make a conclusion. The discourse underlines the theme of Jesus' continuing presence with his people. In place of an eschatological discourse preceding the passion, as in synoptic traditions, and probably traditions known to the Johannine community, John treats his audience to an emphasis on the present experience of Jesus' presence through his past return to them. So I make a summary of this farewell discourse. When we think of the farewell discourse, we need to just, the scholars made different comments over this farewell discourse. First and foremost, people, the kings and the mainly the leaders of the war used to making an exhortation before they enter into the war, and this also makes a kind of exhortation or farewell discourse before entering into the war of that passion narrative. Secondly, some scholars say that it is like people who are going to die before their eminent people, when before their death, they make a kind of prophecy about their life, that this my ending should be like this, or ending after my burial, you should do, the disciples should do this way, that way. So some scholars say that it is like a testament that Jesus makes the disciples to do after his burial or after his death. So that is the second opinion of the scholars. And again, some scholars even tell that it is a kind of farewell in order to make the people aware of his own testament. That is, like Moses, he too is making a testament that after, even before the death of Moses is telling the people of Israel that you will pass through the promised land, you will enter the promised land. And same way, Jesus also is giving a kind of hope to the people of New Israel, that they will, after the death and resurrection, the disciples, the so-called followers of Jesus, will overcome the temptation of the world, and they will become true witnesses to the word of God. And we come to the chapter 13. That is our point of discussion. Today's chapter is 13, chapter 1 to 38. And the ultimate model for love and service, the foot washing in John, is a narrative introduction for the final discourse, part of the lengthy prolegomena to the passion narrative. Jesus' impending death dominates this scene. It intersperses Jesus' words and example of service. If you read 13:1, 3 to 10, we can very well understand it, with foreshadowings of his betrayal, then opens directly into discussion about Jesus' departure by way of the cross. So that is the content of today's chapter. First and foremost, Jesus washes the feet of the disciples. Then with the foreshadowing of then he is speaking about his betrayal. Then he openly discusses about Jesus' departure by way of the cross, that he is going to die. Then this scene therefore paves the way for the farewell discourse. So to say, we can say Jesus presents this farewell discourse in the context of Last Supper. By the foot washing, Jesus prefigures his impending glorification, which is the theological subject of most of the context. So to say, what is glorification? It is death of Jesus. According to the Gospel of John, glorification is dying on the cross, is the glorification, death on the cross. And this act identifies Jesus as the suffering servant and defines his passion as an act of loving service. At the same time, however, it also summons Jesus' followers to imitate his model, serving and loving one another to the extent of laying down their lives for one another. So to say, the main intent or content of the 13th chapter is he is inviting the disciples to follow suit, the example that he presented before them. So to say, they too should wash the feet of other people, or they too should become a kind of symbol of humility. That is the intention of this chapter. So we come to the first part, the setting of the chapter. John again, we can see the first chapter, the first words itself. I just read, now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So we can say, Jesus again links Jesus' imminent time, that hour, with the Passover season. Very clearly presented in the Gospel of John that before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world. In contrast to synoptic picture of the Last Supper, however, Jesus' closing hours before his arrest in this Gospel are before Passover. This detail fits John's chronology, which ultimately supports his portrayal of Jesus as the Paschal Lamb. So to say, we know it is intending to 129. John the Baptist pointing out Jesus and telling that this is the Lamb of God. So here the first words itself presented that it happened before the Passover. And Jesus is going to die as a Paschal Lamb according to the Old Testament tradition of the Passover feast, according to the Gospel of John. The time when the Old Testament tradition, when the people celebrate, the high priest offer the Paschal Lamb, and instead of the Paschal Lamb, Jesus, according to John's Gospel, Jesus offers his life as a Paschal Lamb. That is why the beginning of the chapter 13 itself, that hour is presented, and just before Passover. So even the Passion narrative is in a way presented in the first word of the 13th chapter, verse 1. So John also emphasizes the role of Judas in the beginning of the scene. If you read the verse 2, the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during his supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God. So we can say the verse 2, John very beautifully presents the person of Judas, that he is going to betray. That framing the scene immediately preceding the farewell discourse with the report of Jesus' betrayal, as well as Satan's activity. That is most important, the verse 2, that Judas is presented well presented by the evangelist, John the evangelist. Then finally, John prefaces the scene by emphasizing Jesus' authority, source and destination, which heightens the significance of his service to the disciples that immediately follows. The connection between 13:1 and 13:3 may suggest that Jesus takes his position as Lord of all things only after enduring the death of the cross. In this light, it appears all the more striking that all-powerful Word became flesh and served disciples who consistently misunderstood and sometimes failed him. So we just present what are the authenticity, some reasons, authenticity and significance of the foot washing. First and foremost, the question of historical authenticity. That is, as I mentioned, unlike the synoptic gospel of John very clearly present that it happened just before the Passover, in order to present Jesus as the sacrificing lamb or lamb of God. And second, the message of the foot of washing. That is most important. What is the significance of the authenticity of the significance of foot washing is the message of foot washing. What is the message of foot washing? That all his disciples, all his followers should follow his model, his example in in their ministry. So to say, for Jesus, authority means service. Authority means to wash the feet of the other one. That is, authority indicates. That is why we always present the servant of servant, the servant of the most servant. All the times we present it when we say about bishops or priest or the pope, etc. Because it is the same model all the disciples are expected to follow it. That is the message of food washing, to become humble. So thirdly, the practice of food washing. And when we speak about the practice of food washing, first and foremost, we need to understand the Old Testament, the Jewish tradition. The food washing was always done by the slaves. In the Jewish family, the slaves used to wash the feet of the guests. And same way, Jesus also is washing the feet of the disciples as a slave. So, for Jesus, the authority means to become a slave. That is a practice of food washing is important here. Then fourthly, the authenticity remains upon this humility, that he become humble, so humble that he was able to wash the feet of the other one by becoming the Messiah. So to say, one who is going to save the other should become humble enough by showing the example of Jesus, washing the feet of the other. That is most important. So we come to the food washing and its first interpretation, 13:4-20. So this section explains the salvific necessity of being washed by Jesus and how it functions as a model for believers serving one another, because an announcement of Jesus' departure immediately as well as more distantly precedes this material. It seems clear that John invites us to read the foot washing in view of the cross. That is most important. Jesus washes the feet of disciples in view of the cross, the suffering servant. He presented himself as a suffering servant, and immediately after the food washing or Last Supper, we can say we know that he is going to die on the cross. So he presents this food washing, and we must always remember that only the Gospel of John presents this food washing. That itself indicates that it is a kind of food washing is presented in view of the death on the cross. He presents himself as the servant, suffering servant. In the context of betrayal, 13:21-30, when we come again each word. Another comment on the imminence of the passion, 13:31-33. However, the following material grows even more explicit. Loving and serving as Jesus did demands sacrifice for one another, potentially to the point of death. Sadly, however, the most prominent disciple would fall short of such sacrifice even directly for Jesus. That is most important. So here we can see the first part, the washing of the feet of the disciples. Secondly, we can say the context of the betrayal. Thirdly, the imminence of the passion narrated. Jesus foretells about the passion, and finally, that the final part of the gospel again present the sacrifice. The prominent disciples even failed to understand the words of Jesus. Even Peter himself failed to understand the words of Jesus. So we come to the first part. What is this act of washing? I just would like to read that 4 and 5. then I would like to make the interpretation of it. Verse 4, he got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. See, this is most important. He got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. So here we can see that he tied a towel around himself. So the washing of another's feet, begrimed by travel upon dusty roads in sandals, I just make a kind of historical comments, was a menial task not required even of Jewish slaves. Such utter humiliation on the part of Jesus leads Peter to object, and Peter tells the verse, when we read the verse 5, then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus answered, you do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand. So here we can see the very act of washing. And I just connect this one with the resurrection experience. When we come to the resurrection, we will explain more detail. And here Jesus took the robe and tied around him. And the resurrection, we can see that even in the cross and the resurrection, Jesus was without any kind of robe. And here he majestically comes and washed the feet of his disciples. And Peter makes a comment. Jesus insists that only later would Peter understand, seems to imply more than a lesson in humility. For similar passages in John show that full lesson of the action will not be understood until Jesus is glorified. That is most important. He tells Peter that you will understand the significance and the authenticity of this act, very act, will be understood when he is glorified. Only after the death of his resurrection, only by the arrival of the Spirit. The humility can be understood now. Baptism flows only from the glorified Jesus. So foot washing is also important, that its omission bars one from eternal inheritance. So that is most important. So it also leads to a kind of the sacrament of baptism, that foot washing is important because we become kind of part of eternal inheritance. I just take the words of Simon Peter. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my... Jesus answered him, unless I wash you, you have no share with me. It indicates, some scholars say that it indicates the baptism, the sacrament of baptism, that you are becoming part of the suffering, act of suffering and death, suffering and resurrection of death and resurrection of Jesus, and by that indicates the sacrament of baptism. You know, what is the intention of sacrament of baptism? Sacrament of baptism indicates that we are in a way baptized in the by baptism of baptism, we are entering into the mysteries of Jesus Christ, the suffering, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So in a way, Jesus tells the Peter that you are becoming the part of my suffering, death and resurrection by entering or by this very act. And Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. He said to him, one who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. So Jesus very clearly tells that he need not be washed the head or any other organs, rather only feet, because feet, we know that we are walking in the earth where it is lot of dust, lot of worldly things are happening. So we need to be purified only our leg. That is why the Pharisees or the Jewish tradition, the slaves used to wash the feet of the guests in order to make them to enter into the Jewish house. So that is the very act of washing, 4 and 5. And the necessity of washing is explained by that Jesus, what is the very necessity of the washing of the feet? That by entering the mysteries of Jesus Christ, we need to undergo this act of humility. So we need to undergo the passion, death, and resurrection. So we come to the next verse. Then chapter 10, Jesus said to him, one who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you. For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, not all of you are clean. That is very important, that Jesus very clearly foresees and tells that all are clean except one who is going to betray him, that is Judas. The beginning of the gospel itself, he presented that Judas is in the grip of the devil, and he is not fully clean, or he is not pure, and he is going to betray Jesus. So the verses 12 to 16, I just make a kind of comment about verses 12 to 16 and 12 to 20, the interpretation of the washing. After the washing, Jesus explains the lesson of humility. In Luke's Last Supper, he gives a similar lesson. If you read the corresponding passage in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, verses 24, 27, we can see that this also makes a kind of similar lesson. Indeed, the verses 13 to 16 have echoes in the synoptic public ministry and elsewhere in John. And so many and Jesus blesses his disciples if they understand these things and do them. His words have a parallel in the Lucan version of Jesus' institution of the Eucharist. Do this in memory of me. So what is we need to remember that verse 16, verse 12 to 16 is very important. The Gospel of John does not present the Last Supper, that this is my body, this is my blood, do it in memory of me. He is not presented. The Gospel of John does not present the Last Supper, the Last Supper, the institution of the Eucharist. But the similar way, do this in memory of me, Jesus tells by washing the feet. If you want to become a follower of Christ, you should do it. You should wash the feet of the other. Do it in memory of me. So to say, the Lucan narrative of the Eucharist institution and the washing of the feet of the John is in a way closely connected. So that is why John purposefully avoids the Last Supper, the Eucharistic institution, and rather instead of the Eucharistic institution, he presents the washing of the feet of the disciples, that they should become a servant who can wash the feet of the other, and they should follow this model. And the Eucharist also invites us to wash the feet of the other. So we come to the verses 18 and onwards. There are two sections on the betrayal by Judas. We can see in the Gospel. That is 18. Jesus foretells his betrayal. That is verses 18 to 19 and verses 21 to 30. And first part, The scripture text literally refers to one who ate my bread. Even though John has not mentioned any eating of bread, but he tells that one who ate my bread. And something is, if this missing Eucharistic narrative is now in 651, here we need to connect with the chapter 6, where Jesus speaks about the Eucharistic discourse, and the Eucharistic institution is missing in the gospel narrative, the Gospel of John, and he presents one word, that one who ate my bread. If this missing Eucharistic narrative is, we can find in chapter 6, verse 51, and the treason of Judas in 671 corresponds nicely with this context. So we need to go back to chapter 6, 51 and 671 in order to understand the institution of the Eucharist. Then verse 20, I just read the verse 20, that very truly I tell you, whoever receives one whom I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. So it seems out of place. Some of the scholars say that it is out of place. And interestingly, it is found in Matthew, as well as same discourse where we can find parallel in verse 16 also. If you read verse 16, we can say that, verse 16, very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. So some of the scholars say that even 20 is a kind of greater addition, that whoever receives one whom I send receives. It is almost similar to verse 16. So coming to the words, the second account of betrayal, that is 21 onwards. The second account of betrayal stays close to the synoptics, but the role of Peter and beloved disciple are peculiar to John. That is most important. If you read verses 21 onwards, we can understand, especially verses 23, 22, 23. The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he was speaking. One of his disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So that is very peculiar in this narrative, that is Peter and the beloved disciples are peculiar to John. This never identified disciple is absent from the synoptics. To understand this scene, we should picture the diners reclining on their left sides, head propped up on an elbow, facing in toward the servant with their feet out. The beloved disciple would be reclining at Jesus' right. Reclining was recurred at the Passover meal, and dipping of the morsel is reminiscent of the Passover dipping of bitter herbs into harrowed sauce. Thus, even in the John, the meal has Passover characteristics. So to say, reclining in the Passover meal, it is a kind of act in the Gospel of John, or in the, we can say, the Passover meal. They used to recline one or the other to show that intimacy, and especially in the Gospel of John, that one disciple, the other disciple who was reclining on Jesus, indicates that this disciple is so close to intimacy of John is presented in the Gospel of John, and where we can see Synoptic Gospel, this reclining or this kind of expressions are not mentioned. So John very specifically present that the intensity of John's love to his master. So again I come to the verses 27. After he received that Judas, after he received the bread, the morsel, Judas Satan entered into him, and Jesus said to him, do quickly what you are going to do. The command given, so we can say that the command was given to Judas, that it is your time to betray your master. Jesus, the very words indicates that Jesus is in control of his destiny. The hour of Satan, the great adversary, is at hand, and the night is closing on the night, only with Jesus' permission. Indeed, with a peculiar reference to heel in verse 18, reminiscent of the Genesis serpent bruising the heel of woman's seed, John may see in a scene like this an element of the titanic struggle between the Savior and the serpent foreseen from the beginning of the human story. And we come to the final introduction, the last discourse. Verses 31 to 38. The new commandment Jesus gives. When he had gone out, Jesus said, now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. So, with the official permission given to Satan's agent to begin the process that would put him to death. So, Jesus has begun his rise to glory. So to say, we can say, Jesus letting himself to undergo that glorification moment, preparing himself to die on the cross. The announcing of his departure for Jews a threat is for his disciples a tender and sorrowful fearful. That is very clear in the verse 34-35. And he tells, little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me. And as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. So for Jews it is a threat. Then he says, a little time I will not be with you. And the same way, it is a sorrowful event for the close disciples. And his farewell gifts is a new commandment, that is of love for one another and keep sake of Jesus' presence, the last glow of the light of the world. So we can say that Jesus gives a new commandment, or he gives a new commandment to the disciples, that love one another as I have loved you. That is most important. Or as I wash the feet of the disciples, you too are called to feed the feet of the other ones. And the 13th chapter ends with Jesus foretells the Peter's denial. Here we can see that Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow afterward. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Jesus answered him, will you lay down your life for me? Very truly I tell you, before the cock crows, you will have denied me 3 times. And here we can see that the exchange with Peter supplies the last contact, the synoptic account of the Last Supper. If you look, Luke at the supper time, Luke presents at the supper time, Mark and Matthew while walking to the Gethsemane list, Jesus foretells the Peter's denial. And Jesus foretells the Peter's denial as part of the discourse, final discourse. So differently it is present. I once again repeat that Luke presents this foretelling the Peter's denial at the Last Supper, And Mark and Matthew present while walking into Gethsemane, whereas John presents as part of the farewell discourse. So before begin his farewell discourse, or before as the part of the introductory part of the farewell discourse, Jesus presents the Peter's denial. And Peter's reckless promise to lay down his life is an implicit willingness to be a good shepherd. This aspect we can see again in the chapter 21. 3 times Peter denied, and 3 times Jesus asked him, do you love me? In chapter 21. When we speak about chapter 21, we will connect this Peter's denial and the reaffirmation of Peter that I love you more than anything else. The love commandment. So John very clearly tells to the mouth of Jesus that Peter is going to fail in this night, but the role of the shepherd will be ultimately to be his. So he will be raised up, or he will be given the role of shepherd, the role of a good shepherd, or to guide the disciples. That is most important. So my dear friends, the 13th chapter is over, and if you have any clarification regarding it, you are free to ask the clarifications or any questions or doubts.